Okay, Jeremy here, Jeeps Unlimited PartsBreakers.com, 303-666-9020. I've done comparison videos in the past, and I realize they work really well, and I'm always really proud of them, but having an empty frame is tongue twister, is some kind, I get it, give me a minute. It is sometimes easier to identify when there's still a Jeep sitting on top, or at least a body or an axle. So these are two Jeeps. One is a wide track, the left guy, right? Not in the best shape, not saying it is, at least the tub. We'll see on the frame. We don't know until we pull them, although I suspect that frame's probably shot. But anyway, that's a left side, a wide track, not even the one we're really looking at. And then you have this green one here, which isn't terrible, and the frame looks really nice on it. One of the reasons I like this frame, and I'm just gonna quickly go in, it's not my point of this, is how coated it is in oil. And one of the things I've learned over the years is the more oil on a frame, usually the better, the cleaner they are. It just helps preserve them. It's kind of like when I go out to Pennsylvania and visit my buddy out there. I've delivered to him before, State Patrol retired guy. He now does on the side, there's something called like filament film or something like that. And it's literally like a casing of grease that they spray up on the undercoating. So same concept, except this wasn't intended, obviously. So anyway, the point of this video more or less is just not to show this frame yet. I'll maybe show it later, because I think it's one of the only possibly good frames we have on a narrow track. Just I don't have any more. Not even that fact we don't have any good ones. This one might be the only one we actually have. So we'll see the validity of how good it is later. But for now, we're looking at this front area here, and all we're trying to do is identify if you're coming up on a Jeep, especially if the title's wanky on it, and that happens a lot on CJs. People flip-flop titles all the time, or the DMV screws up. You know, there's a number of reasons that it can happen. But point is that you're on a CJ7, okay? That first year CJ7 76. Fives had been out since 55, okay? And this is not going to be the same on a 5 because they didn't ever make a wide track, technically a wide track 5 frame. So we're just going on CJ7s right now. And how you identify to see if it's truly still what it is. So 76 to 1981 should have been a narrow track frame, okay? And really, as far as the tub is concerned, and there is a good video of this I put up when we flip over the tubs and actually show you, the tub doesn't care. You can put an early tub on a late frame on an early tub. That's not where the difference is. The differences on them is how they outboard their axles and make them wider for the wider track, okay? And in order to do that, you can do it different ways, but the way they did it is they put a removable shock tower on them, which doesn't mean anything that's removable, it's just the way they did it. But it outboards the spring perch, and actually doesn't really outboard the spring perch at all. What it does is it outboards the location for the shock, which gave the Jeep the ability to put a wider set of axles. And I don't remember exactly how much wider. They are significantly wider than a narrow track set. But okay, so if you come upon your Jeep and just pretend there's a big tire sitting in here, and you need to look up and over, and you're gonna be looking for this bracket right here. This bracket is a welded on bracket on all narrow tracks, okay? Now, I have seen in the past where people have knocked these off and re-welded it, or even put a bolt-on style on them for whatever reason. But factory, it would have come with a welded on front bracket on both sides, okay? Now, don't get this confused with the rear, because all the rears are this way, whether it be wide track or narrow track, okay? They're all gonna have a welded on shock here in the rear, okay? So again, we're only looking at the front for this, and there's other ways to tell this as well. Okay, now coming on this one here, this is what I'm talking about. This is your wide track, okay? And again, it kind of outboards the spring up, gives them a little longer throw, different shocks, and was able to bring the shock mount, instead of being mounted on the plates like they used to be mounted on these spring plates here on the narrow tracks. That's another way you can tell, is if you look at the bottom of your spring plate, there'll be another point that comes off, except at the rear, and that's where your shock would hook up back there. And on a wide track, they actually put a mounting tab on the axle itself. So if you look at yours and you have a mounting tab here, welded on, that's specifically for the shock, and it's not attached to this bottom spring plate, or you look and you see you have a bolt-on okay, not welded, shock tower here, and usually they go up quite a bit higher, then you know it is a wide track setup. Now, again, that's the factory way. The other thing is that it's a possibility on a narrow track, original narrow track, that somebody wanted to run wide track axles. And in that case, what you would have seen is very similar to wide track. They would have cut the weld, so unless they did a really clean job, you likely would see the remnants of this welded spot. And usually they'll cut them off, or they'll cut the pins off. Okay, so you'd see something left over there, unless they did a really clean job. Or I've seen where they just cut the pins. They leave on the little triangle plate, okay? And then they'll drill holes just like you see on this wide track, okay? And they'll literally bolt on. They'll buy a set of these and they'll bolt on. And that is a way that you can, more cost effective than buying a whole frame, especially if your frame's good, convert over to a wide track set. So there's other ways too, but that's just the yard way, okay? So these are all CJs in here, varying degree. Clearly they're sitting here with tubs, so they're not in great shape. The reason I say that is because tubs do not last. OEM tubs are one of the hardest things to find. And after 21 years of doing this, I would say there's the list of unicorns, the CJ7 tub and the CJ5 as well. And pretty much anything from 86 on older is the coveted. They're the hard things to find on these. Frames are on that list too, but definitely higher up. And in this case, the narrow track is becoming elusive because I have several wide track frames. And I thought I had maybe one or two narrow track, and the only ones that I seem to have are on, there's one there, and then there's one there. These are both considered wide track. That's a CJ5, so that's not going to be him. And that's it. So really, that's it as far as my narrow track frames go. Now, if you're in the camp of you really don't care, and the camp here is going to be, the Jeep's already highly modified, right? It's not all original, whether it be modified in a lift kit or big tires or a crawler or whatever, or maybe it's modified in the sense of a tub. For example, customer I'm working with right now, he's got a fiberglass tub. That's considered a highly modified Jeep. It still has value, don't get me wrong, it definitely has value, and it's nice because the tubs don't rust, but it brings a different value, and it brings a totally different customer than the guys that are looking for all original steel or original equipment on them. So if you're in that camp, I would not be real keen or real, pushing for an original frame if you're not running an original tub. And that's same for the Japanese, or not Japanese, the Taiwanese or Vietnamese, whatever they are, steel replica tubs. Same thing, whether it be fiberglass or one of those, that's still a very highly modified Jeep and has different value than the collector guy looking for all original, right? So I wouldn't be stuck there. But I would tell you this, if we have a narrow track, and we should here, I don't know, I'll have to get that one pulled to see. And we, like I always tell people, we scope our frames, we measure our frames. I mean, clearly that one came in, not wrecked. So that's a big thing, but we still have to run a scope down them for a big reason on CJs, TJs, any of those, is towards the back of them is where they like to blow out. So now I've seen frames toasted from the front to the back, especially Midwest, East Coast frames. I mean, they're bad almost everywhere, but by and large, even clean frames where they start showing problems is going to be the back area. And on this particular frame, there's a bumper mount, which is factory, an angled bracket, and you got to really pull those brackets. So this is still pretty much a full teardown that we would have in front of us on this guy in order to get this thing not only off and washed and cleaned and scoped. I can't even scope it right now at all because there's this winch bumper on the front of it. Looks like they had a plow on it. And so to even run a scope good down this thing, you really got to get a straight shot at it. You can go around stuff, and I know there's the better abilities to do that these days, but I use a nice scope that will run, and it doesn't bend very well. So it tends to get into the sides, and you can't see anything when I do it that way. So I'd like to get this thing fully stripped down, washed, then scope. We'll always measure it, just even though it looks to be like it wasn't wrecked. We always do that just because, and then make a final decision on what grade it's going to be and what price it is. Typically CJ7s do bring a little bit more than CJ5s, not by a lot, a couple $100. I don't have a lot of clean CJ5 frames right now at all. So I have a few that we have listed, and they're heavily discounted. They have a variety of issues, not anything severe enough not to use, but definitely have stuff that I wouldn't necessarily think is, thank you, is as clean. So I'm gonna cut this video off here. I know I ramble a lot. So 303-666-9020. That's kind of what we're going to be waiting on today, and also what direction the customer wants to go in. One last thing, if you decided to go to wide track, you would, now you can use a narrow track axle still if you, no, let me take that back. You can go one way and the other, not the other way around. You can use a wide track frame with narrow track axles, but you're going to need to bring back in, and you'd have to re-weld your purchase or buy a kit that brings them back in that way. If you don't, your angle for your shock is going to get weird in the front, okay? Or the other option would be to swap out your axle set, and you have to get a matching set because your front and rear diff have to match the same ratio, and go ahead and go with a wide track set. Now, there's not a huge benefit of going to wide track other than your stance. You do have more stability, but with that said, the Jeep does take on a slightly different look. You can't really see it on this one as much. The way the wide tracks look, though, is your tub and your flares here are, your tires are pretty much equal. And if you ever look at a narrow track, I don't have any with axles under them right now that are sitting upright, but especially on a CJ7, they almost look like they're tucked in a little bit. And so if yours doesn't have that look, it's got one of two things. One, somebody's running a spacer on it to bring the tires back out, or two, they're using a wider wheel, wider tire, and that's throwing the axle, the look of it to be more of a wide track look. So if we end up finding out that you do indeed have a wide track frame, or if somebody's thrown in wide track axles, if that's the case, all you're looking for on this front axle is, does your shock, just to reconfirm one more thing, does your shock here, or your sway bar link here, okay, that post that comes off at the back of your spring perch, this plate here, if there's another post that comes off of it, and I'll find one here and show you, and that would be where your shock would hook up. If it's not hooked to that perch, and you do indeed have a tab, and I do have axles in the back that show that a little bit better, that you could see that on. This one actually has the perch. This was a spring over axle kit, so this is going to look a little different. So don't get confused with this too much, because somebody's put this leaf spring on top of this axle, which is they call it like a poor man's lift kit. Not a bad idea to do. I'm not going to get into that right now because it makes a whole different geometry issue. But look at the spring perch. Just imagine this being flipped over upside down, so it's spring under, and that is what you're looking for. That little post that comes off, the same one that your sway bar hooks to, except for the back side, is where your shock's hooking up. So that's your way you tell a narrow track from a wide track. And then the other way is obviously just measure them. But it's hard to measure wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface when you have tires on them. So that's just kind of your other cheat to kind of look at them and see. There's your spring under there, okay? And again, this one's a little bit different because it doesn't have a sway bar on it. So you would have a post here, and then you would also have the post off the back. This is a CJ5, and that's why. And there's another good look at what your top mount would look like here. So, okay? So if you see something that's different than this, or you do happen to have a tab on that axle, or have a mountable shock tower up here, removable, then in that case, yeah, somebody's done some switching on that, and that's real common, okay? I mentioned this a second ago. I wasn't going to yab on, but one of the big reasons it would be advantageous to go that route would be if you happen to locate, which we happen to have right now, which is really rare, but the other unicorn part for a CJ, which is the 1986 Dana 44 flange wide track axle. They only did them in 1 year, and not all of them had them, okay? We happen to have a 7 back that's got it. It's in an 86 right now. And in 20 years, I probably had 4 of those. We had one not too long ago, went to Cali. So that would be a popular setup to go with, but it creates its own, not really issues, but just different style, especially if you have a decent ratio right now. I hate to pull you out of that because almost all those 44s have really tall gears in them from the factory. So if you're gonna be running a 350 someday, or an LS, or some other kind of crazy performance motor, then that tall gear would be great. Otherwise, if you're still running that 6-cylinder like you have, you'd want to sit, hopefully you're already sitting with a modest 355, 373, something that's pushing you down the road decently. If you happen to have a 292, which they came that way, then you wouldn't be lost in anything else. So, all right, that's it, promise. 303-666-9020. Thanks, and have a great day.